The United States Navy may be the most technologically advanced and broadly capable seafaring service on this planet, but in terms of sheer numbers, America's globe-spanning Navy pales in comparison to the maritime juggernaut that is China. Today, China's combined Navy, maritime militia, and militarized Coast Guard, all of which fall directly under the military command structure of the nation, account for more than 750 total ships, outnumbering the American Navy by a factor of better than 2 to 1. And as China's ability to mass-produce warships continues to gain steam, America's remains in steep decline, with U.S. shipbuilders consistently unable to produce new ships on time or on budget as older ships age out of service. And as a result, despite long-standing efforts to grow the Navy's numbers, it's currently expected to shrink by at least a dozen vessels by 2027. If left unchecked, this could result in the U.S. Navy becoming something of a glass fleet, with ships it can't truly risk in a fight due to the inability to field replacements within meaningful timelines. So let's talk about America's plan to kick its shipbuilding capabilities into high gear and what it might take to turn this trend around. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Sea Power. The U.S. Army is canceling the M10 Booker not a tank program after 80 of them have already been delivered, and the latest in a long list of Army programs to be canceled after seeing billions invested into their development. Army Secretary Dan Driscoll attributed this cancellation to the M10's weight, which at around 38 tons was just too heavy to airdrop, and I've been staying on top of this story thanks to Ground News. Ground News is an aggregator that collects articles published by news outlets all around the world and places them all into a single easy-to-read feed that helps me not just stay on top of what's going on, but to see right through the most common forms of media bias. Right here on Ground News, I can see that only 7 outlets have covered the story since it broke, which might point toward a lack of political controversy surrounding its cancellation. Task and Purpose highlighted the M10's weight as the reason for its cancellation, while Inside Defense emphasized Army Secretary Dan Driscoll's position that the M10 was a prime example of the Army's poor acquisition practices, and I'd call those both fair takes. Now, Ground News also shows you vital information about each outlet along with those headlines, like their political bias, factuality rating, corporate ownership, or government affiliations. And I love the Ground News For You tab that compiles stories that are sure to interest me because they're based on topics I've chosen. Ground News is a big part of my research and my day-to-day news consumption, and it can be for you too. Just go to ground.news/sandboxx with 2 X's or follow that link in the description below to get 40% off the Vantage plan that I use every day. Again, that's ground.news/sandboxx to get 40% off their Vantage plan that'll help you stay on top of things. In March of this year, the Government Accountability Office testified before Congress on the state of American shipbuilding, painting a stark picture of the current state of things and the direction that they're trending. Today's Navy operates 296 or so crewed, large-hulled combat vessels, with stated aims to reach a fleet size of 381 within the next 30 years. But despite the Navy literally doubling its investment into ship construction over the past 2 decades, it has not been able to increase its number of in-service ships over that same period of time. In fact, as I mentioned at the top, if current trends hold, the Navy will actually see its fleet strength shrink between now and 2027, with about 13 more ships retiring from service than new ships coming online to replace them. Now, this trend runs in stark contrast to China's rapidly modernizing and expanding naval fleet, which continues to grow both inside and outside the confines of China's disclosed defense spending. You see, in order to claim lower defense budgets, China funds efforts like its militarized Coast Guard and maritime militia under domestic lines of accounting, despite these organizations falling directly under the military's chain of command rather than the nation's civilian leadership. And China's shipbuilding industry also benefits from a similar blurring of the lines between civilian and military endeavors. According to one March 2025 report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies, China's commercial shipbuilding boom has directly enabled China's naval expansion, with large commercial vessels being built alongside PLAN Navy vessels at largely military-focused shipyards. And this has allowed China to funnel the billions of dollars it earns producing commercial ships for foreign buyers directly into Navy ship construction. And as a result, China isn't just beating the US at fielding new ships, it is dominating the entire global industry. China's shipyards now account for more than 53% of the entire global shipbuilding market versus America's 0.1%. In fact, as we covered in a recent video, the China State Shipbuilding Corporation alone built more commercial ships by tonnage in 2024 than the entire US shipbuilding apparatus as a whole, collectively, since the end of World War II. And China's expanded shipbuilding infrastructure, funded through these commercial efforts, allows for more naval ships to be built for less cost and on shorter timelines. According to the Senate testimony of Navy Vice Admiral James Downey, commander of Navy Sea Systems Command, the U.S. Navy currently has 92 ships under contract to be built, with 56 vessels at some stage of construction. However, actual ship deliveries are on an average of 1 to 3 years behind schedule across the breadth of production. And production costs themselves are consistently rising at an even higher rate than inflation, meaning it's getting more expensive to build these ships as time goes on. The Navy's first new Constellation-class frigate, which is a smaller surface combatant than the Navy's workhorse Arleigh Burke-class destroyers, is currently only 10% complete, some 2 years into construction and 5 years since contract award. And in fact, earlier this month, the War Zone reported that the ship's design, which is based on an existing Franco-Italian design, is still yet to even be finalized. The goal was to expedite construction of these ships by maintaining roughly 85% commonality with the European design this frigate is based on. But the Constellation-class design has seen so many changes since then that the ratio has completely reversed, with only 15% commonality and roughly 85% of the design now entirely new. And as a result, the projected cost per frigate has now increased from around $1 billion apiece to an estimated $1.4 billion each instead. And as we recently covered, the Navy's new ballistic missile submarine, the forthcoming Columbia class, is suffering from similar delays, with the first ship of this class, the USS District of Columbia, now expected to be delivered anywhere from 12 to even 18 months behind schedule, sometime in 2029. And in keeping with cost trends, the first Columbia-class sub is now expected to come in hundreds of millions of dollars over budget, outpacing even the shipbuilder's own projections, at least according to a 2024 report from the Government Accountability Office, or the GAO. That same list of issues also plagued the construction of America's new Ford-class supercarriers, with supply chain issues and complications related to new technologies like electromagnetic aircraft launch and recovery systems, pushing delivery of the second ship of this class, the USS John F. Kennedy, from this year to next. And the next carrier after Kennedy, the new USS Enterprise, is already said to be roughly 28 months behind schedule, with its new delivery date now pushed back to 2030. And as these timelines stretch on, so too do the construction costs. The first ship of this new carrier class, the in-service USS Gerald R. Ford, rang in at around $13.3 billion, which is an immense price tag that was expected to drop for follow-on ships that would benefit from all the lessons learned in the construction of the first. But the next three Ford-class carriers are now projected to cost $12.9 billion, then $13.5 billion, and then a heart-stopping $14 billion, respectively, by the time they've been completed. And as Brett Seidel, the Navy's Deputy Assistant Secretary for Research, Development, and Acquisition, testified, the reasons for these increased costs and these lagging delays are many. including reduced competition and capacity at Tier 1 shipyards, the atrophy of America's manufacturing sector, shifting Navy requirements, burdensome acquisition processes, depressed investment, workforce shortages, diminished proficiency, supply chain disruptions, historic underinvestment in shipbuilding infrastructure, and industry consolidation following the end of the Cold War. And I think it's important that we recognize just how much stuff that paragraph summarizes, because issues of this scale and this magnitude don't arise because of simple problems that can be solved with simple solutions. What looks like one big problem is actually an immense number of smaller ones that have slowly grown until they overlap with one another, until it's tough to see where one problem stops and the next begins. So now that we at least have a visual on the breadth of the problem, let's talk about the efforts for solutions, and in particular, a new executive order issued earlier this month aimed at addressing America's shipbuilding problems. Now, just like our analysis of the Golden Dome executive order for a new air defense apparatus over the United States, we're going to look at this order and its potential implications, absent the politics, keeping our analysis limited to the order's impact on the warfighter and America's defense apparatus. Now, this executive order is actually centered around commercial shipbuilding, but as we discussed regarding Chinese shipbuilding, these two industries are very closely intertwined. And like that Golden Dome order, this new executive order, entitled Restoring America's Maritime Dominance, doesn't actually offer any solutions, so much as mandating a formal exploration into options. And logically, it begins with a broad assessment of the current state of shipbuilding in the United States, led by the heads of the Defense Department, the Transportation Department, and Homeland Security. Now, within 45 days of this order, which was dated on April 9th, these efforts need to be boiled down into a report to the President outlining how to grow America's shipbuilding infrastructure while also reducing future delays and budget overages, which is to be followed by an action plan, as they call it, to execute on identified solutions within 210 days. But of course, this isn't actually the first effort to find a solution to America's shipbuilding problem. In fact, the Congressional Budget Office has already conducted a pretty thorough analysis of what it would actually take to increase the Navy's fleet strength to 381 ships. And the answer might not be what senior leadership really wants to hear. It's just going to cost a whole bunch of money. The CBO estimates that getting Navy shipbuilding back on track would require an investment of some $40.1 billion per year for the next 30 years, totaling more than $1 trillion. Now, that would mean increasing the Navy's budget by about 46% per year, but doing so would fund expanding American shipyards beyond the 7 most commonly used today, staffing these shipyards with more than 250,000 highly trained personnel and expanding competition within that industrial base. You see, today, roughly 70% of the critical components used for U.S. Navy submarines, for instance, all come from suppliers with no competitors. Now, this not only can cause high prices, it creates single points of failure, as a single supplier delay can postpone construction of an entire ship. Now, it is worth noting that the Navy has run their own numbers and arrived at broadly similar conclusions, though with slightly lower overall figures. Navy estimates still run high, but are consistently between 8 and 16% lower than the CBO's $1 trillion figure. So, in other words, maybe I was wrong. The Navy's shipbuilding problems really are broad, far-reaching, and complex, but the cure for what ails America's shipyards may not actually be all that complicated at all. In fact, it's the same solution Uncle Sam often turns to at times like this, just heaps and heaps of money. But as for whether or not that can really get American shipbuilding back on track, unfortunately, only time will tell. And with that ends yet another edition of Sea Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below, and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.